It was a nightmarish scene. After being locked in a dungeon together in the dark for more than a week and a half, given virtually no provisions and left to go mad with starvation, when the door was opened on what remained of Matilda de Briouze and her son William, what was found shocked the medieval world and had profound effects on the reign of King John, who had ordered this gruesome double murder. It even inspired a specific clause in the famous Magna Carta. This is the story of the woman who ate her own son, and be warned, while there aren't any horrible images, it does contain a graphic description of their remains from an original primary source and is not for the squeamish. Our story takes place during the reign of King John, who was on the English throne between 1199 and 1216. Now, John was an increasingly unpopular guy, and there were rumours, probably true rumours at that he had murdered his nephew Arthur of Brittany in 1203 in order to secure his hold on the throne. The teenager had certainly disappeared in that year, and his precise fate remains unknown. But one of John's attendants, William de Briouze, who was with the king that year and had even delivered the boy up to his uncle, said that John had clobbered Arthur to death with a rock at Rouen and dumped the body in the river Seine, from which it was retrieved and buried in the priory of Saint-Marie-des-Prés. Remember this story because it will be important. Now, William de Briouze, and please be kind about my French pronunciation, that rolled R is difficult for me, was a great magnate who held lands in England, Wales, and Ireland. He had helped to smooth John's path to the throne after the death of his older brother, Richard the Lionheart, and we can see from the number of the king's charters that William signed that the two were together a great deal. We might even say that William was something of a favourite, and he continued to accumulate wealth and positions as the reign progressed. What he also accumulated, though, were debts to the crown, and these would be used to help to destroy him and his family. This family consisted of his wife, Matilda de Saint-Valery, who he had married on an unknown date, and whose father, Bernard, was the Lord of Beckley in Oxfordshire. Together, they had 9 surviving children, including 4 sons, of whom the eldest was another William. By 1208, relations between John and William Sr. were deteriorating. Not only was William increasingly rich and powerful, as we've seen, he likely knew incredibly damaging details about John's rumoured involvement in Arthur of Brittany's death. Furthermore, he owed the crown enormous sums of money and was not keeping up with the agreed payment schedule. It was time to cut him down to size. John began to call in the debts in full, and he demanded hostages from the de Briouze family in order to secure William's good behaviour. He may also have been trying to shore up support from his barons and magnates through the use of hostages more widely in order to offset the dent his authority had taken in March of that year when the Pope, with whom he was engaged in an almighty row, placed England under interdict so that things like Christian baptisms, marriages and burials couldn't be carried out in the kingdom. Whatever the reasons, he expected at least some of William and Matilda's sons, some of whom were now married men with children of their own, to be handed over. When his messengers arrived at the family home to get these hostages, however, Matilda, who you'll also see referred to as Maud in the historical accounts, just as you will see variations in the spelling and pronunciation of Briouze, refused to give over any of her boys. In fact, even if she'd wanted to, her eldest was unavailable as he was already a hostage in the custody of his own brother-in-law, Walter de Lacy. Supposedly, she also made a very indiscreet comment which only incurred even more of the king's wrath. According to contemporary English monk and chronicler Roger of Wendover, Matilda, wife of the said William, with the sauciness of a woman, took the reply out of his mouth, and said to the messengers in reply, "I will not deliver up my sons to your lord King John, because he basely murdered his nephew Arthur, whom he ought to have taken care of honourably." Now this outburst could be read as an insinuation that her husband had told her something about Arthur's death, though John was widely assumed to have murdered him by this stage anyway, so she wouldn't have been saying anything that everyone wasn't already thinking. Nevertheless, Roger of Wendover tells us that William immediately tried to minimise the damage and placate the king without handing over his sons, for, Her husband, on hearing her speech, rebuked her, and said, "Thou hast spoken like a foolish woman against our lord the king. For if I have offended him in anything, I am and shall be ready to give satisfaction to my lord, and that without hostages, according to the decision of his court and of my fellow barons, if he will fix on a time and a place for my so doing." The messengers, on their return to the king, told him what they had heard, at which he was seriously enraged, and privily sent some knights and their followers to seize this William and his family. But he, being forewarned by his friends, fled with his wife, children, and relatives into Ireland. It's a great tale, but how trustworthy is Roger as a source? Well, although contemporary, which is always a good thing, he is unfortunately also known to have made things up, sometimes telling stories which were closer to parables than historical fact. For instance, it was he who claimed that John was requesting hostages for more than just the de Briouses, but this assertion is not backed up anywhere else. It is also clear that much of his work was based on other works he had available to him, some of them now lost, rather than his own recollections. Now, while the first issue is a real headache for those of us trying to figure out what's true and what's not, the second could actually be considered a boon if he's providing information that would otherwise have been entirely lost. That said, it would be nice to know exactly which earlier chroniclers he was copying so that we could assess how reliable they were. All of this is to say that I wouldn't take his account of a conversation for which he obviously wasn't present too literally. Matilda may not have been so indiscreet, though at the same time John's later treatment of her does indicate that he hated her and might support Wendover's tale. Other descriptions of her personality do not describe someone that we would think of as letting her tongue run away with her, however. The monk Gerald of Wales, born around 1146 and died in the early 1220s, said that she was a prudent and chaste woman, a woman placed with propriety at the head of her house, equally attentive to the economical disposal of her property within doors as to the augmentation of it without. Gerald was not just a contemporary writer. He was also from an aristocratic background with ties to the Welsh, English, and Irish noble families and a history of court service lasting up until around 1196. He therefore likely knew Matilda's husband, and very possibly Matilda too, and was well placed to provide an overview of what she was like, though it could have been coloured by his later dislike of King John. By the by, if you have Irish connections like Gerald did, you might want to check out my book, Find Your Irish Ancestors Online, which is available from Amazon as an ebook and paperback and is linked below. I'm not claiming it'll help you trace your Irish genealogy back to Gerald of Wales's lifetime, but you can certainly hope for the 18th or 19th centuries, and some will be able to go even further back, depending on how much of a paper trail your family left behind. Whatever the exact nature of the falling out between the de Briouses and John, several sources do confirm that it happened, that the family fled to Ireland to avoid his wrath, historian Dan Jones says this took place in early 1209, and that John embarked on a campaign of punishment against them by seizing lands, dismissing members of the family from positions of power, and hunting them down. The king claimed that he was pursuing them, quote, according to the custom of England and the law of the Exchequer, but he was fooling no one. Roger carries on the tale by telling us, correctly, that King John crossed the Irish Sea too. He doesn't tell us the exact date, however, this well-known invasion of the island occurred in the summer of 1210 and cost a staggering £6,180 on ships and wages for sailors and soldiers alone. That's £10.6 million in today's money. He caught up with Matilda, her son William Jr., who was possibly already in Ireland with Walter de Lacy due to his pre-existing hostage status, and William's wife, at a fortress in Meath. Despite having earlier said that William Sr. was with them when they fled, he has now disappeared from the narrative, and instead it was these three other members of the family who were captured there. The king then sent them, quote, loaded with chains into England, and ordered them to be closely confined in Windsor Castle. Later on, Roger tells us that the noblewoman Matilda, wife of William de Briouze, and her son and heir William, with his wife, who had been imprisoned at Windsor by order of the English king, died of starvation at that place. But this is just one version of the story. How does it match or differ from other sources? In the Annals of Margam, we read that while the king was staying in Ireland with his army, Hugh de Lacy, Earl of Ulster, was put to flight, and William de Briouze the younger was captured, together with his wife, several of his sons, and his mother, Matilda de Briouze. They were first kept under the strictest guard and taken by sea to Bristol, and afterwards led to Windsor Castle, a ransom of 50,000 marks having been imposed. William the Elder was allowed to go free as if to raise the money, but he then fled to France. When this was discovered, the king immediately caused his wife and son to be starved to death in prison, and he drove Walter de Lacy, his son-in-law, into exile, and confiscated all the possessions of the aforementioned nobles, which were many in England, in Wales, and in Ireland. So there's a bit more information here, especially around how William Sr. managed to get to France while his wife and heir were left in England. These annals also agree that William Jr.'s family were also taken captive and that Windsor was the place of death for him and his mother, and starvation the method. That sum of 50,000 marks, by the way, was an astronomical amount, so much that it wasn't even really realistic that such a ransom could ever be raised, especially as the de Briouze family income had been hit by land seizures and the loss of high-paying offices. For context, the Bank of England currency converter puts it at £86.3 million in modern money. Now let's move on to the really detailed account of their actual deaths and the one that suggests cannibalism. This account comes from The History of the Dukes of Normandy and the Kings of England. It was written by a French courtier known only as Anonymous of Bethune, who composed it in the early 1220s and had this to say about the situation. Matilda of Briouze and William her husband, when they heard the news that the king was coming against them, did not dare wait, but instead fled from the land. William of Briouze went off to France, but was taken through a safe conduct, and Matilda his wife and William their son fled to Ireland to Hugh de Lacy, who was William's relative from Briouze. The king seized their land, then he entered the sea and passed into Ireland, and came to the city of Dublin, where he was received with great joy. A little later in the narrative we hear that King John then besieged the castle of Carrickfergus, which was very strong. This is entirely true, by the way. He did besiege the castle in 1210. Hugh de Lacy and Matilda de Briouze and William her son had been inside it, but when they heard talk of the king's coming, they did not dare to wait, but entered the sea and fled to the Isle of Man, where they stayed for 4 days. Then they passed over into the land of Galway, that's in Scotland. There, Matilda de Briouze and her son William were captured. They were then sent back to Ireland to King John, who was lord, and who was still before the castle of Carrickfergus. Already we see some differences here. First of all, William Sr. seems to head to France much earlier in the narrative, possibly without even going to Ireland first, and this tallies with other information we have, which states that he didn't go there in 1210, and in fact met up with King John in Wales before the king went across the Irish Sea to try to work out their differences. This would tally with John sailing over to Dublin, as you do indeed depart from Wales in order to get to the Irish capital and keep the sea voyage as short as possible. The whole chronology around his separation from his family and escape is really quite muddled, however, depending on which source you read, and I'm not sure we'll ever know the right way of it. Second, there's no talk about his daughter-in-law being imprisoned alongside Matilda and William Jr., and I still remain fuzzy on how William Jr. ended up in Ireland. Did he travel there with his mother, or was he already there as a hostage of Walter de Lacy? And third, the pair are driven from Carrickfergus Castle, which is in the northern county of Down, rather than a castle in County Meath, now in the Republic, and are not captured in Ireland at all, instead going to the Isle of Man, then Scotland, which is where they are seized, only to be sent back to Ireland. It's a dizzying amount of sea travel for the 13th century, but I will say that Carrickfergus sits on the edge of Belfast Lough, which is the body of water you're looking at here. The castle is just out of view, a bit further down the loch on screen left, so it's actually pretty close to Scotland. Like, you can not only see Scotland in the distance on a clear day, you can see the wind turbines on it because it's so close, and I speak from personal experience here. It's therefore not implausible that they were sent back across the Irish Sea to the king, rather than being taken directly to England. Carrickfergus Castle, by the way, is still in excellent condition given how old it is, and well worth a visit if you're ever in Northern Ireland. This video isn't sponsored or anything, but I've been there a few times myself over the years, and they do a good tour. Our narrator, Anonymous of Bethune, goes on to say that King John then captured the castle of Carrickfergus, placed the bailiffs in charge of the land, and afterwards returned to England. When he arrived in England, he imprisoned Matilda de Briouze and her son William in Corffe Castle, placing them with a sheaf of oats and a piece of raw bacon. No other food was given to them. So we're left to assume that John has dragged this unfortunate mother and son from Ireland back to England with him and put them in Corffe Castle, which is in Dorset, southwest of London, rather than Windsor Castle. We are also now getting really specific details about the manner of their murder, and in the next section, this becomes pretty horrific. The writer of this history says that on the 11th day, the mother was found dead, sitting upright between the legs of her son, completely emaciated, except that her head had fallen back upon her son's breast, as if she were dead in his arms. The son, though dead, still remained perfectly upright, except that his head leaned backward against the wall like a dead man, and the mother, out of distress, had eaten all his cheeks away. When William de Briouze, who was in Paris, learned this news, he soon died thereafter. Other sources say he expired on the 9th of August 1211, and many testified that it was from grief. The Bishop of Hereford, his son, buried him, to whom the king later restored their father's lands. The exact date of death for Matilda and William Jr. is unknown, but it was before the end of 1210, and no other source but the history of the dukes gives such detail or claims that Matilda resorted to cannibalizing her own son. If her husband was in Paris and the writer of this history was based at the French court, there's good reason to suppose that he heard the details which were passed along to the unfortunate William de Briouze Sr., and they may well have been true. Before I move on, there's just one other thing I'd like to say about this translation, and that is that while I was researching this video, I came across one academic article published in a highly reputable journal, the English Historical Review, which had translated the original French in such a way that it said that William Jr. had eaten his mother's cheeks. Now, my French isn't great, but I put this text through a couple of online translators and got different English versions of it, but they did all indicate that it was Matilda who had eaten her son, not the other way around. That's what all other versions of this story say too, and it's why I have followed that version of events here in my video. However, out of curiosity, and because I know some of my listeners are native French speakers, I've put the original medieval French text on screen, and if you would be so kind, can you confirm for me what it says? Who ate whom? Let us all know in the comments, please. However accurate the stories about Matilda and William Jr.'s demise were, and just to throw another wrench in the works, the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography says that one of Matilda's daughters was imprisoned with them before being released in 1214, their treatment was a scandal, and it would have far-reaching consequences for King John. John's biographer, Sidney Painter, called the king's falling out with William de Briouze the greatest mistake John made during his reign, as it caused him to show his true and horrific colours to all those around him, helping to turn them against him. As you may know, within a few years he was forced to sign a document called Magna Carta, which restricted his powers and those of his successors, and is the basis of many English, later British laws, all the way down to the present day. It includes a clause still on the statute books even now, which states that no free man shall be taken or imprisoned, or be disseised of his freehold or liberties or free customs, or be outlawed or exiled or any other ways destroyed, nor will we not pass upon him, nor condemn him, but by lawful judgment of his peers, or by the law of the land. We will sell to no man, we will not deny or defer to any man, either justice or right. Had this law been in place 6 years earlier, John, theoretically at least, could not have treated the de Briouze family as he did, and its inclusion in Magna Carta may be seen as a reaction against his infamous treatment of Matilda and her son. It seems even he realised he'd gone too far, for we get a fascinating little insight into the king's thoughts on what he'd done, dating to the very end of his life. As he lay dying of dysentery on the 10th of October 1216, he made a grant to Matilda and William's daughter, Margaret de Lacy, to build a religious house at Ackenbury, south of Hereford, quote, for the sake of the souls of her parents and brother. Perhaps he hoped it would earn him some forgiveness from the Almighty, and he didn't have long to wait to find out if it did. 9 days later, he was dead. Many contemporary monastic writers believed he had gone to hell, with one named Matthew Paris quipping that, foul as it is, hell itself is made fouler by the presence of John. I imagine the de Briouze family would have agreed. I hope you found that story interesting, if horrible. To support the channel and help me to keep making this type of content for you, I'd be very, very grateful, with a cherry on top, if you would consider giving the video a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel with the notification bell switched on if you haven't done so already. It's entirely free, it means that YouTube will let you know when I upload, and it helps to show the platform that you think my content has value and should be recommended to others. If you want more history from me, you can also join my YouTube channel membership by clicking the join button under videos and following the on-screen instructions. Or you can head on over to my Patreon page at patreon.com/historycalling and join up there to get extra perks ranging from bonus podcasts to early access to ad-free videos, recommendations for other great history content on the web, and your name in my monthly patron lists, depending on which tier you join. A lot of my posts are also available as one-time purchases in my Patreon shop if you don't fancy a monthly subscription. Thank you too to those of you who support me using the thanks button underneath videos, as this is very much appreciated. But if you're unable to support financially, which is totally fine, I know not everyone can or wants to, but would still like some bonus material, sign up to my free mailing list on my website, historycallingofficial.com, to get 2 complimentary downloads right away about spotting good history books and interviewing family members about your family tree, as well as my monthly newsletter. I'll leave that link below for you, and you can of course unsubscribe at any time. So having heard all the evidence, do you think Matilda really resorted to cannibalism, or do you think this was a detail made up later on for some extra shock value? Let me know below, and for more medieval history, check out my video all about how the Black Death affects you, or my episode on why the Dark Ages are called that. Whatever you choose, please enjoy, and until next time, keep learning.